In September 1914, a ship leaves Europe and approaches an isolated island in Antarctica. After docking, David and a group of crew hitch a ride on a boat to reach the island. They then take a long walk and bring supplies to the old hut where David will be staying for the next few months. Every year, a new meteorologist is sent to the island to replace the previous one and continue studying the local climate. Before leaving, the captain needs to find the researcher who arrived on the island a year ago to take him back home, so he accompanies David to the lighthouse tower. As no one answers their call, the pair decide to break in and find the lighthouse keeper asleep on the second floor. After waking him up, Axel questions the whereabouts of the meteorologist who was sent to the island a few weeks ago and discovers that he didn't survive. According to Gruner, the man left to explore the island a few weeks ago and never returned from his expedition. On hearing this story, Axel becomes suspicious and tries to convince David to return to the mainland, but the young man decides to stay and continue his predecessor's work. For the next 12 months, David will live in exile on that island to record the intensity and direction of the winds. Every day, at the end of the working day, he returns to the hut and is drinking his tea when he hears the sound of someone trying to open the door. Knowing that he and Gruner are the only humans on the island, the meteorologist gets scared and gets up to investigate. As he approaches the door, he sees the hand of some creature poking through a crack and begins to stomp on it. At this point, the creature becomes furious and runs around the house. Frightened by the movement, David hides in the basement and waits until the beast leaves. Through a crack in the wood, he observes what is happening upstairs, and when he realizes that the monster has found him, David strikes it with a sharp object. After being hit in the eye, the creature flees and the weatherman remains hidden until the next morning. When the sun rises, he gathers the courage to go out and sees blood next to the trapdoor. When he arrives outside the hut, David sees footprints in the sand and realizes that the creature has walked towards the sea after being attacked. In an attempt to understand what has happened, the man runs to the lighthouse, but this time he can't open the door. When he hears the newcomer shouting his name, Gruner appears at the window and says that David should have gone back to the ship with Captain Axel. At that moment, the young man understands why the lighthouse keeper has built countless traps to protect the tower, and decides to reinforce the security of his hut so that no monster can break in during the night. After blocking the doors and windows with wooden slats, David takes the gun that was hidden in a box along with dozens of bullets and prepares to face his second night on the island. Looking out of the window, as the light from the lighthouse hits the rocks, David spots numerous humanoid creatures approaching the hut and prepares himself for a possible attack. When the monsters start breaking the glass of the window to try to break in, the man shoots and manages to delay them, but the invasion continues. Determined to avenge their injured friend, the creatures try to break down the door, so David realizes it's time to step up his defenses and throws a lit torch at the rubble he has piled up outside. In this way, the weatherman manages to ward off the invaders, but what he didn't expect was that the flames would reach the hut so quickly. Seeing the fire going under the door, David uses a blanket to try and put it out, but when he realizes that his plan has failed, he decides to break down the door so that he can get out of the cabin before it goes up in flames. With nowhere to take shelter, David hides behind the tower, and suddenly it starts to rain. Hours later, the man returns to the hut to check what's left of his belongings and soon realizes that there's no way he can continue living there. So he comes up with a plan to take over the lighthouse, and when Gruner leaves to fetch water, David goes after him. When he arrives at the waterfall, the man draws his gun and prepares to shoot, but is surprised by an aquatic creature that attacks him. After knocking it down, David is about to pull the trigger, when suddenly, Gruner appears and orders him to leave Inares alone. According to the lighthouse keeper, the creature is completely harmless, and after convincing David not to attack it, Gruner allows the newcomer to join him in the tower. After gathering up the supplies left in the hut, the pair walk to the lighthouse, and Inares tries to treat David's burns in a not-so-conventional way using licks. After observing the relationship between Gruner and the beast, David realizes that the man treats it like a domesticated animal that follows his every command without question. According to the lighthouse keeper, that species of fish man avoids light at all costs, which is why they usually only appear at night. So, when the sun goes down, Gruner orders David to get his gun ready to fire as soon as the creatures reach the tower. Seeing the monsters approaching, the lighthouse keeper starts firing, but ends up being abandoned by David during the attack. While Gruner shoots at the invaders, David is overcome with fear and becomes paralyzed, as he doesn't have the strength to react in such a situation. His peaceful and observant nature prevents him from positioning himself on a battlefield, and at the sight of the lighthouse keeper attacking all those creatures, David faints. Hours later, he is woken up with a bucket of water and scolded for abandoning the battle. Even fighting alone, Gruner manages to defeat the fishmen, and in the morning orders David to fetch water. The following night, Gruner says he will give the weatherman another chance to make amends for his cowardice and waits for the right moment to start shooting. But this time, during the battle, the man locks David out of the balcony and forces him to fight alone against the dozens of creatures trying to climb the tower. During the battle, Gruner takes a nap and, in the morning, opens the balcony door to check if his partner is still alive. To his surprise, when he opens the door, he finds David covered in blood sitting on the balcony after having eliminated dozens of monsters. Over the following weeks, the two men realized that they needed each other to survive, so they decided to work as a team to keep their enemies at bay. As time goes by, David realizes that the behavior of the fishmen is unpredictable, as they attack some nights and not others. The meteorologist wonders why these creatures risk so much to rescue Inez, as several of them have been eliminated in an attempt to get her back to the sea. A few weeks pass and David realizes that the monsters have stopped attacking, so he comes to the conclusion that it is safe to go out and explore the island. During one of these expeditions, David finds the skeleton of a whale resting on the beach and wonders if, like those marine mammals, fishmen have a habit of migrating during the winter. Even after so many days without any sign of these beasts, Gruner positions himself on the balcony every night ready for the attack. The more time he spends in the company of Inez, the more fascinated David becomes by the specimen that shares so many human characteristics, while its morphology is totally adapted to life in the ocean. Knowing that the species has not yet been discovered by the scientific community, the meteorologist suggests taking it to Great Britain or the United States. That way, both would become famous and could make a lot of money. However, Gruner says he has no intention of returning to civilization. While they are both playing chess, the lighthouse keeper spots a creature climbing the tower and immediately takes out his gun to shoot it. After eliminating the fishman, he closes all the windows and orders David up to the lighthouse to turn on the light. That night, an even larger number of creatures gather to invade the tower and the pair must team up to try and keep them at bay. When they run out of ammunition, the two men engage in hand-to-hand combat against the things, but are unable to stop them from invading the tower. During the escape, Gruner ends up being captured, but David helps him get rid of the monsters. Seeing his friend with a large wound on his leg, the meteorologist realizes that they won't be able to win this war alone, so they both remain in hiding until dawn. Luckily, it doesn't take long for the sun to rise, and when daylight breaks, the fishmen return to the ocean. With Inez's help, Gruner manages to treat his injury and speed up his recovery so that he can get back to work. The aim now is to build new protective barriers to make it more difficult for the monsters to climb, but while he's working, David spots a boat almost disappearing over the horizon and runs to get a beacon, hoping to be rescued from the island. However, before he has a chance to fire the beacon, the man is attacked by Gruner, who is willing to do whatever it takes to keep the island and the creatures that live there a secret. Seeing the lighthouse keeper attacking David, Inez decides to intervene and expresses her fury in defense of the young man. Furious, the old man prepares to strike her, but the creature manages to escape and Gruner grabs the beacon to prevent David from calling for help. Hours later, when he finds Inez on the beach, hiding behind the whale's skeleton, the meteorologist approaches her cautiously and tries to befriend her. With the beast's help, David finds a boat with oars and rushes to share the news with Gruner. However, the man claims to know about the existence of the boat and reveals that he didn't say anything because he knew David would try to flee the island. The problem is that the young man wouldn't make it very far, and during his journey, he would end up losing his life to thirst, hunger or hypothermia. After hearing this, David decides to ignore the man's words and begins to prepare his boat for departure. While working on restoring the boat, David sees Inez cooling off in the water and decides to join her. Seeing this scene, Gruner feels jealous and asks the young man to help him go to a ship graveyard to look for a new shipment of weapons. The next morning, the pair get into a boat and row to the site. After anchoring the boat, the lighthouse keeper helps David get dressed so that he can dive in search of the dynamite that sank along with a cargo ship. When he reaches the bottom of the sea, the meteorologist walks cautiously over to the wreckage of the ship and attaches a hook to the boxes so that Gruner can pull them to the surface. After putting one of the boxes into the boat, the old man throws the hook back so that David can attach it to a new box. However, during this process, the young man notices an unknown creature approaching and looks around to see if there is any threat nearby. Suddenly, a monster knocks him down and he starts pulling on the rope to call for help. However, instead of climbing down to help him, Gruner remains motionless as he wonders whether he should return to the island leaving his partner behind. However, before the lighthouse keeper has a chance to move the boat, David abandons his wetsuit and swims to the surface. After rowing to the island, The pair take the boxes to the tower and Gruner celebrates when he realizes that some of the explosives are intact. So he decides to scatter the bombs around the lighthouse with the aim of blowing up the fish men before they even have a chance to start climbing. Throughout the winter, Gruner kept vigil day and night, awaiting the arrival of enemies who never showed up. Noticing that a snowstorm is raging outside, David goes to check on the lighthouse keeper, only to find him motionless, watching intently for any movement from the ocean. The man is so obsessed with winning the war that he doesn't even notice when his hands start to freeze, so the weatherman has to go and get him. As soon as Gruner enters the tower, the young man disconnects the detonator cables and goes down to have dinner with him. The fishmen haven't been seen on the island for 3 weeks, so the lighthouse keeper concludes that Inez warned them about the explosives. In an attempt to take his anger out on someone, Gruner strikes her and David springs into action to stop the attack, because he knows that Inez is just another victim of that madman. His plan now is to set up an ambush, leaving the door open to attract the beasts. Once the creatures are nearby, Gruner will press the detonator to blow them up. When the sun goes down, the two men start the plan and David takes his gun to eliminate the monsters that manage to reach the entrance door. Meanwhile, at the top of the lighthouse, Gruner uses Inez as bait and orders her to sing to attract the rest of her kind. A few minutes pass and no one appears, so David ends up getting distracted and is attacked by one of the sea monsters. After knocking him down, the creature tries to bite his neck, but the man attacks it back with a sharp object and he has time to think of a plan B. Even though it's wounded, the creature runs towards him and David throws its body over a wooden stump that runs through its body. Hearing the sounds of a large horde of fishmen approaching, the meteorologist grabs his gun and starts firing as he climbs the stairs. At that moment, he realizes that the number of invaders is greater than he is capable of eliminating alone, so he runs to the top of the lighthouse, where his companions are. Determined to eliminate as many of them as possible, Gruner presses the detonator lever, but nothing happens. So his only option is to pick up the gun and eliminate as many enemies as possible while David reconnects the detonator cables, and finally they both manage to blow up the dynamites. The problem is that the fishmen weren't the only ones affected by the bomb, as both David and Gruner end up being injured. Hours later, when he wakes up, the lighthouse keeper goes down to check that his plan has been successful and finds dozens of monsters still alive amidst the rubble. As they are too wounded to move, Gruner uses a spear to strike them through the heart, so he can save ammunition. Seeing all the harm he has caused to the individuals of that species, David feels remorse, but Gruner shows total insensitivity, as if all those lives meant absolutely nothing to him. Later, when night falls, Inez begins to make frightening noises, as if in pain, for she is in deep mourning over the destruction of her entire family. Without sympathizing with the creature's suffering, Gruner says that it will soon forget everything and come crawling back to his feet. According to the lighthouse keeper, it was those noises that attracted him the first time he saw her. The man says that he found Inez tangled in a fishing net, and after saving her life, the man came to see her as his possession. That afternoon, while walking along the beach, David sees some manatee younglings swimming around the island, but when he sees them, the creatures leave. Returning to the tower, the young man finds Gruner using gunpowder to build new, even more powerful weapons and realizes that he is still a long way from putting an end to the war. Later, while the lighthouse keeper is taking a nap, David approaches him and finds a photo of Gruner's wedding party, who, after losing his wife, has secluded himself on that deserted island. At the end of the afternoon, the young man spots one of the younglings on the sand and tries to approach it, demonstrating that it is not a threat. Little by little, he manages to win the little one's trust, who approaches the human who helped destroy almost his entire family with caution. Soon afterwards, Inez appears with the survivors of his people and approaches David, who is numbed by seeing so many of those fascinating creatures up close. However, before the young man has a chance to make contact, Gruner appears and starts shooting. In an attempt to convince his partner to put down his gun, David suggests negotiating a truce with the creatures and claims that they were both wrong to try to destroy them. Discovering that even Inez has turned against him, Gruner goes into a tailspin and starts talking to himself as he runs back to the tower. Despite appearing to be a strong and determined man, the truth is that the lighthouse keeper is just an insecure guy who is afraid of being abandoned. That's why he spent months forcing Inez to stay with him in the tower and didn't mention the existence of the boat so that David wouldn't try to leave. So, when he leaves, the meteorologist continues his mission to gain the trust of these monsters and understand a little more about how they live. However, when one of the younglings approaches him, it ends up being hit by a shot fired by Gruner and loses its life. At this point, the fishmen realize that the war is not over and run back to the ocean. Seeing Inez frightened, David runs to the tower to stop the attack and strikes Gruner. The lighthouse keeper immediately strikes back and the two start fighting. After falling down the stairs, Gruner tries to reach his axe to eliminate his opponent, but David strikes him with his blade. After being hit by a few punches, the young man ends up being knocked down and Gruner picks up the axe to eliminate him. When he realizes that he is about to be defeated, David tries to negotiate and convinces the old man that he doesn't want to do it. After dropping his axe, Gruner turns his back and walks down to the beach to gaze at the stars. At that moment, he is captured by the fishmen, and during the attack, he realizes that he is completely defenseless, as he is fighting dozens of creatures with a thirst for revenge. As he has no weapons, all Gruner can do is accept his end, and David locks the door so that the lighthouse keeper can't get in, as he knows he is suffering the end he deserves. As he listens to the old man's screams, David remembers the meteorologist who was sent to that island before him and wonders if his predecessor also suffered the same end, as that would explain why his body was never found. Sometime later, 12 months after arriving on the island, the meteorologist is visited by an officer who mistakes him for Gruner and asks where the meteorologist is who was sent there a year ago. So, instead of revealing his true identity, David decides to take up the post of lighthouse keeper and realizes that a new cycle is beginning. So what did you think of this movie? Leave it in the comments below. And if you liked the video, like and subscribe for more movie recaps. See you next time.